You're listening to a CNA podcast.
I've spoken to some people who were considering startup life. They were more interested in the idea of being in a startup than to really look at how they can sustain and be part of the startup success.
So our producer went to talk to some of her friends who have started in a startup. They felt that there was a crazy workload for little money.
It is a common misconception that startups cannot pay market rate or above market rate.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Work It podcast with Tiffany and Gerald. Whether you're navigating your first job or looking to make a career switch, we hope our discussions so far have been helpful.
And remember, we have our Ask Me Anything segment at the end where I'll answer one of your career-related questions. So Tiffany, what's the question for today?
Today's AMA question is about ageism. But before we get to that, let's start with our main discussion first, which is something that I think you can identify, Gerald, because you were previously employed in a mid-sized organization and now you are the boss of your own startup.
Yes, I worked in a mid-sized public sector organization. I also worked as like an intrapreneur. That means like starting up a small team within a larger organization with a slightly different aim.
Okay.
So having the experience of working with different teams, different sizes, it really allowed me to experience how it was like the different cultures and different ways of working. Personally, for me, I enjoy working in smaller teams, smaller organization, more nimble and more agile, easier to pull everyone together. Tiffany, how about yourself? Would you prefer to work in a smaller organization or larger one?
Okay, I have always been working in a larger organization, but same as you, I would work in smaller teams in a larger organization. So that's as much of an experience as I have with what a smaller organization would feel like. I like the innovative, the experimental part of it where you can set your own goals, almost like you can set your own KPI, and it's always all hands on deck. And I feel like the growth can be exponential as well because we can stretch your skills. You can sign up for one role, but then you get other opportunities to do other skills as well.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's also very easy to get caught up when you are in a smaller organization with the mundane tasks because everybody has to do everything, right? So again, all hands on deck, pros and cons. With bigger companies, I feel that there are clear processes, clearer delineation of roles as well.
So today we are here to talk about the different organizations and the sizes. And who do we have on the show with us?
Today we have Jeraldine Phneah. She is the enterprise lead of startup company AlphaSense. And she's also previously worked in larger organizations as well. So Jeraldine, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Hey, glad to be here.
According to a 2024 report by Enterprise Singapore, Singapore is the top destination for startup investment in Southeast Asia. It closed in 2023 with a whopping $8.5 billion across 522 deals. So obviously that's great news for somebody like Gerald, who's a boss of his startup. But you started, Jeraldine, in a mid-sized organization. What drew you to that initially after you graduated?
I guess when I first graduated, I was pretty open. I was looking at multiple options from bigger companies to smaller ones as well. Because when we first graduate, there's also a period of time in our lives where we are trying to discover ourselves. But subsequently, after my first job, I realized that I would like to move at a pace that is much faster. I enjoy innovation. I would love a much more dynamic work environment, which drew me to joining startups.
How long were you in a mid-sized organization for?
So I started my career in a market research firm, and I was there for about 1.5 years before making a switch to join a startup, where I spent almost 2.5 years.
Yeah, I was thinking like making that switch, right? What was the biggest difference for you? I know you mentioned how the thing was a bit faster, but what were some of the pros and cons that you can share in making that change?
When we think about bigger companies versus startups, there are always pros and cons to each. When we think about the largest company, typically some of the pros that comes will be the likes of having a good brand name. Because when you have a great brand name, it actually opens a lot of doors. It increases the odds of recruiters calling you significantly.
That's true.
Yeah, and if you're someone who is early in your career, I would not underestimate the importance of a brand name on your resume.
Yeah.
On top of that, MNCs tend to offer a high quality of training. I would say that this is largely due to the fact that they sometimes have more resources. And on top of that, one of the key things to look for is really the network that you get when you work in a larger company. Because just by nature of the company being huge, You get to meet lots of new people, and that's very important at the early stages of your career.
And I think it's not just a lateral peer network. You get exposed to more mentors, people from different departments or people with more experience in the company. And you never know how many doors they can open for you later on as well. It's interesting that you mentioned about being in a larger organization, you get more training opportunities. Because I think that's true, especially when you're starting out. A lot of times you may not have the depth of skills yet. And in a larger company, your managers will say, okay, we're going to put you through these particular courses. We're going to get you this training. And like it or not, it counts as your work hours too, right?
Yep, correct. But having said that, while larger companies do have really strong training, you do get to learn a lot from startups as well. So firstly, at AlphaSense, when I'm working at now, I find the enablement team to be extremely strong and the training programs and onboarding to be really structured and effective. I would say even more so than many of the other larger firms that I've worked at.
Okay, what was the difference?
Like I knew exactly what was required of me in the first 30 days, 90 days, and the first 6 months of being in the role. So that's really something enjoyable that I got to experience at AlphaSense. While larger companies do have very strong training programs, mid-size, smaller firms can also offer the same type of benefits sometimes as well.
Yeah, Tiffany, this kind of reminds me of the Gallup study, right? Where it showed that smaller companies have certain advantages, and some of these advantages are exactly what Geraldine articulated.
Yeah.
Things like how they feel that there's better career growth there. And this growth perhaps is not really the growth in terms of maybe promotions, but it's that sense of development that what you mentioned earlier, right? You develop your skills, you get exposed to more things. Like what Geraldine said about how she knows very clearly what she needs to do. There's a very clear focus.
Okay.
She has a lot of control over her work.
You are right. The people who have been surveyed, they say that they do feel more engaged. They are more satisfied with their job. This Gallup survey where they compared small organizations, which is less than 25 people, and large organizations, more than 5,000 people. What surprised me is that there are actually a lot more advantages that people felt working for a smaller company. They felt more respected at their work. And I guess it's because there's a flatter hierarchy as well. They feel that the organization always delivers on promises that they make to their customers. And they said that they received meaningful feedback, at least in the last week. I do agree that when you are in a larger organization, sometimes you feel a bit like a cog in the wheel. And then at the end of the day, you're wondering, where do I see my contribution in the larger scheme of things?
Yeah, there's so many cooks involved in preparing the dish. Sometimes you just don't feel like you really own the dish.
Yeah.
When I was working in a larger firm previously, I found it very hard to connect the vision of the company and the mission to what I was doing. However, when I am working in my current firm now, I actually got to be part of like the founding team here in Asia to build the market and to grow it from scratch. So we started off at around less than 5 people, and then right now we are a team of 50 or so. So the ability to really shape things from the ground up, to be shaping culture and leave a huge impact on the organization as it takes its first step into APAC has been an extremely meaningful journey for me.
How come it's easier for you to embody the mission or the vision or the meaning of a smaller company than a larger one? What's the difference to you?
I guess the mandate was very clear, right? To expand our presence in APAC, to build a positive culture, to help your teammates become successful and all. When you join a larger company, sometimes you might lose sight of that because you are either a replacement hire or perhaps maybe at a later stage company, the growth is not as fast, which is why you are meant to keep things going versus grow and expand something.
Yeah, I thought those big companies, they always put the mission and vision at the doorway and then you walk past every day. You're supposed to feel like it's attached to you, right? But it doesn't
You think
work.
all of us are like, have that morning exercise where we have to do our chants, is it?
Yeah, it doesn't work. But I like what Geraldine said, right? She feels like she's very much part of the team. She's heavily involved. The goals are very clear. Everybody needs to pull their weight. So that's why the meaning comes from there.
I actually have a different experience from you. So as a journalist myself, I found that working for a bigger organization helped to open doors for me. And that actually helped me to achieve the company's vision and mandate better. So for example, in a previous organization that I was in, it's an international news network. The minute you say that, I come from this company, 9 out of 10 times people will say, yeah, I will talk to you, which allowed me to do better investigation, to get to the heart of every story. And that was actually the mission of the company. The brand name itself is not just good for your resume, but sometimes it's actually even good for executing your job. Would you say in your experience the same?
Yes, coming from software sales, I definitely agree with that. When I had a huge brand name behind me, it was much easier to get meetings
Yeah.
versus being in a company that is perhaps maybe new to the region, disrupting the industry. At the same time, I found a lot of meaning and satisfaction, as well as learning opportunities and the chance to develop my skills when entering a new market and growing it versus coming in with something that is already established as well. So the question goes back to, what are you optimizing for at this point in your career?
Let's talk a bit about the cons. So far, we've been talking a lot about the pros of working for a startup, but what are some of the considerations or not so great things when it comes to working for a startup?
When you join a startup, you have to be sure about what you're getting yourself into, because not all startups are made equal. And you have to really make a calculated bet in this case. For example, I used to be part of a startup where the leadership was changing constantly, and that made it really a rocky ride. One of the things to look out for is really the leadership. How long have they been there? Do they have a skin in the game, and how invested they are? Because as the saying goes, a fish rots from the head, right? If the leadership is not aligned and not committed, it's really hard for a startup to be successful.
So you're saying that if, let's say, I'm a fresh graduate and then someone says, oh, there's this company, very exciting. They just started 1 year in. Maybe a company like that, you might want to be a bit more wary because 1 year in, the leadership may not have been very stable yet.
If the company is 1 year old, what I might want to look at when evaluating a startup is the background of the founders.
Okay, so have they done other startups before? Have they stayed long in a job? Are these your considerations?
Yep. And of course, I'll look at perhaps founder market fit as one of the key points as well, based on their background and then what drives them. We'll read interviews about them just to get a good idea.
Wow, so you almost have to CSI your potential boss.
Yeah, because if the company is not stable or not growing yet, then the best bet is really the people in the company, right? The founders, they are the best bet to make this successful. So if you've got someone who's not from the industry, doesn't know, the person's never done this before, then the chances of success could be lower. I mean, not impossible, but could be much lower.
And failure is higher.
Leadership is really key. There's this quote about how A players would hire A players as well, and that would bring the organization to greater heights. Beyond leadership, I will also look at a couple of things. For example, maybe perhaps the growth metrics, how fast they are growing, total addressable market, what are the types of investors that they can attract and bring on board, and use all this to make a holistic decision about to what extent can I invest my time. Because you have to think about yourself as an employee. You're actually investing your time and your prime years in a company. You want to make sure that it is something that is going to pay off, because you can work super hard at a lousy company and you can work the same amount of effort at a fast-growing, dynamic organization, and each of these two would yield very different results for the efforts that you put in.
True. It's not just only looking at the trajectory of the market, right? Not just saying, okay, now AI is the next big thing. The startup comes out and say, oh, we're doing AI. But you need to really look carefully at this company, the founders, the growth matrix, everything that you have just mentioned earlier.
I've spoken to some people who were considering startup life. Like what Tiffany was saying, they were more interested in the idea of being a startup than to really look at how they can sustain and be part of the startup success. So the product itself became the sexy thing to be part of, but they didn't look into the financials. They didn't have the conversation with the leaders to ask what's the plan and how you're going to raise the funds to keep this company floating. So they didn't do all these. And then after they joined, then it wasn't a very good fit, I must say, because they thought that they had certain ideas that were not validated.
Yes, correct. On top of that, it is also important to look inward at yourself. So going back to the question, what are you optimizing for in this period of your life? What are you prioritizing? Because all this will give you answers into whether what you choose as a job would be suitable for you or not. Something else to look at also is, are you ready? Because at a startup, it's very often that you have to do a few things that are beyond your job scope. So while my main role is really on customer acquisition, expansion, very often I have to also help out in terms of training, like building culture, organizing events and all that, which is a really fun part. But not everyone might enjoy it, especially if they would like a lot more work-life balance.
Yeah, so our producer went to talk to some of her friends who have started in a startup. And that's actually one of the common gripes that they gave, which is they felt that there was a crazy workload for little money. To be fair, because they're starting up, they don't really have a lot of money to pay people. And or they might go, I will pay you in equity. I think increasingly there's a growing group of people who want that work-life balance, who might feel that if I'm hired to do this, why am I scheduling calendar invites?
Definitely, there will be situations whereby some people join startups and then realize that they have to do a lot more for the team than what they sign up for. Having said that, I find that the best type of personalities that would excel in a startup environment is one that embraces the we versus me mindset. So this means someone who is thinking in the best interest of the company, of the team, happy to share the glory and the wins with the team versus just being focused on himself, for example.
I think also going beyond just being a team player, right? Because if you're going to part with some precious resource that you have on a person, you're not just looking at whether the person is capable to do the work. You also want to really know, why do you want to do this for me? Like, you could go to another company, you could join another bigger firm in a turn of an eye. So why should I invest my time to induct you, to part my precious money, to train you, only to have you leave later? So I think a lot of times, from a startup owner's perspective, what they want for the team is to see not just a person who's willing to do more, but you're also able to articulate why you want to be part of this team. Why do you buy into the vision of the company? What is so interesting about the work that helps you, maybe even on a personal basis, because you know you cannot compete on benefits. You know you can't compete on pay or progression. So there must be something that you're looking for. And if the person is able to articulate that, then I think it will be a lot better.
Perhaps maybe offering a different perspective also in the topic of compensation. It is a common misconception that startups cannot pay market rate or above market rate. At least for the tech sector or the software as a service sector, which I'm in, I do often find that startups can be equally or if not more competitive because they want to invest in going to market, expanding for new customers as well. In this sector, it doesn't mean that if a company is in a startup phase, they will not be able to offer as much in terms of compensation as one that has already gone public, for example. Of course, a general trend I observe is that in terms of benefits, it might not be as competitive as many of the larger firms. And definitely there's opportunity to improve in this area. When it comes to the early stages of your career, to what extent is benefit really so key, right? Especially when you do not have dependents at this point.
But interesting that you were talking about the optimizing at which point of your career
Yes.
do you want stuff. Because so far we'll be talking about fresh graduates, but I want to move the conversation a bit to later point in your career. Let's say, for example, you are in your maybe early 40s and you have always had this like itching desire to join a startup. But then there's always this holdback because the fear is also stability as well, right? In your 40s, you are now saddled with a little bit more debt, more loans, you now have dependents. What other things should somebody consider before taking the leap and say, it's time for me to move to a startup?
I guess the first thing to look for is really your finances. Assuming the startup closes down 1 month from now after you join, do you have sufficient savings to still live comfortably and not be overly stressed? After all, Singapore is an expensive place, right? And at the same time, you also have to consider your family as well. The support that they give you is incredibly important and will really go a long way in helping you to ride this wave of growth.
I think finances, you can't run away from that. The other thing is also, of course, the mid-career in their 40s, if they're thinking of joining a startup, they'll be worried, how long would that career last?
Yeah, I'm curious, Gerald, you did that. What prompted you to do that crazy idea of moving away from something that's so stable and is guaranteed iron rice bowl, and then after that starting up your own company?
Yeah, for me, I think I have something to offer. I want to do something different. I think I can do a better job than what's out there in the market, and I want to try.
Okay.
And my family member told me, do it earlier. Don't
As
do it
opposed
later.
to, in your 50s.
Yes, do it earlier. Because as you grow older, there are lots of opportunity costs. And if today you tell someone in their 40s to consider starting their own business or joining a startup, they will say, what happens if it fails?
Yeah. So do you have to have that, there is a possibility it might fail kind of mentality at the back of your head?
Definitely. For me, I have 3 other ideas of what I might do if these things fails.
I see.
I have some ideas already. So
Which is okay. They're all startups.
yeah, they're all startups or they're joining someone else or helping someone else. So in the process of career development, we are not locking ourselves in one role itself. But I think from a financial perspective and also even the external environment where people might wonder, okay, in your 40s, you join a startup, then now it failed already and you want to come back into a mid-sized MNC or mid-sized company, there might be other things like maybe age discrimination. There could be other factors here that could affect your considerations of hiring you. Someone I met yesterday told me, right, if you send out your resume at 30, you get a lot of calls. You send out a resume at 50, you hardly get any calls. And this was the experience themselves.
I see.
Yeah.
I second that as well. I think age discrimination is definitely unacceptable. But But at the same time, it's really very unfortunate that it's still prevalent in today's society.
Yeah. If today I'm a hiring employer in a mid-sized company and I see a mid-career person going to the startup, actually I will want to see the person favorably.
Okay.
Meaning that this person was willing to leave the comforts of a very stable organization, go and try something, probably learned a lot. And if had to leave, not of, let's say, because funding ran out, right? That's not the person's fault.
Yes.
Then I want to pull on this person because this person has shown himself or herself to be adaptable,
Yes.
to be also very resourceful, be willing to try, very learnable. So I think these are other signals that we can see beyond just the age.
Yeah, I definitely would give this person a lot more respect, right? Because of the fact that he's willing to leave his or her comfort zone and try something new. And it's never easy to do things like that, especially the older you get.
One of the questions that I've heard people talk about, and we mentioned it earlier, is about when startups offer you equity instead of, say, cash in terms of your salary. Should you actually say yes if the company says, okay, I would offer you both cash and equity?
I guess the benefit of joining a startup is always the upside that you get, right? Because in the tech industry, there are many people who have really done well for themselves once the company goes public and they were actually able to sell off their shares. I would say that it's really common for stocks to be part of someone's package whenever they join a new tech company, for example. And it's definitely worth taking.
You were given stocks.
Yes,
Okay.
correct. But at the same time, don't plan your entire future on it. Because if you think about stock-based compensation in private companies, valuations can fluctuate significantly, and some might have the opportunity to sell their shares at a good time versus others as well, based on the types of the shares that you get as well.
When you enter the company is also crucial, right?
Yes.
Because when the company is young, the stock value is not so high. So as you stay on in the company, the stock value obviously will increase. But if you're coming in just right before they are about to go public, then it's a bit of a different story.
It depends on the nature of the companies and the growth trajectory. There are so many factors that can influence valuations at this point. So to answer the question about shares, salary, so far I do not know any company that just pays on shares alone.
I don't think that companies will only pay your shares alone, but I guess is there like a threshold, meaning to say,
Cannot exceed a certain
yes, of your
amount.
pay package?
Wow, this one goes back to your own conviction in the organization, which ties back to the points that we spoke about earlier regarding due diligence.
And also your comfort level, right?
Yep.
Whether or not the cash component is enough for you to meet your monthly expenses.
Yeah.
I think today we talk a lot about things like what we should look out for before we join the startup. We also talked about things like what are some of the things to be wary of if you are also thinking of making the switch. I think at the end of the day, like we always say, it's a very personal choice. And don't think of it as, okay, if I move towards a startup, I'm set on this path for the rest of my life. Because our jobs, things can change and situations can change. It's always you can move from one or the other as long as you keep your eyes open.
From my own experiences, the majority of Singaporeans still want to stay at where you are with a place with a nice pantry, dental benefits. And there's no disrespect to them. But for those of you who really feel like you have something like a greater purpose, you feel very strongly towards a product or a service or a solution that's out there that's not within what you're doing now, right? Then go and find out a little bit more. Go and talk to the startup owners or even become a startup owner yourself. You never know how far the journey can go for you.
Yeah, going back to some of the points that I've been reiterating throughout this podcast. Firstly, know yourself and what you are optimizing for at this point in your life. Is it work-life balance? Is it impact? Is it opportunities for growth? All these questions are only questions that you can answer for yourself. And the second part was really do your own due diligence on the company that you're going to join.
So take Geraldine's advice. Pick up that phone or email, speak to that person that you potentially want to work for. Find out more about them. It's okay to just reach out to them. So thank you so much, Geraldine, for coming in and sharing with us, not just your story, but very helpful tips as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, we are back with our Ask Me Anything segment, and today we have a question on ageism. Now, this question was sent in by our listener, Kelvin. Kelvin saw an Instagram post and it advised not to reveal your graduation year in your resume, and I guess LinkedIn as well, because he said ageism is real. Now, Gerald, is that tip valid?
In terms of ageism, is it real? I think yes, it is. It's something that many employers will not admit to.
Okay.
But sometimes it's a subconscious bias as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Imagine if your interview panel, all of them are younger than your candidate. There's already something that may work in the minds of the interviewer, right? But of course, if you are referring to what should you put on the resume, whether you should put your graduation year, my personal view is, you know what, it doesn't really matter whether you put there or not. And the reason is because if you put it in there, the concern here is people can infer your age, right?
Yes.
But there are also many other ways that people can infer your age from your work experiences.
The first year that you start work, they can kind of tell.
All your past job experiences, they can tell how many years you have worked. Some people say, maybe the earlier ones I'll hide. Then I'll put the more later ones. But then you also can total up the number of years you work. I will even say sometimes even from the name, you can also guess the age.
I see, like a Lawrence.
Yeah.
You know of which vintage they
Yes,
are.
there are some names that are very Gen Z and there are some names that are a bit older.
Caden, Jaden.
Yeah. So there are lots of ways to discriminate against people.
So obviously, if this is coming from a point of view, is that if recruiters really wanted to discriminate you, there are a lot of, I guess, markers that they can use to look out for these signs. But ordinarily, you are saying that it's just a point of reference for them.
Yes. The only advice I'll give is for resume writing, maybe don't put in your primary school living cert year, your secondary school.
Why not? I'm very proud of my primary school.
Maybe you are the kind that got very high scores, or your primary school is your primary school is very branded kind.
Oh.
But typically employers just want to see the latest qualification you have, the highest one, maybe the top two, maybe your diploma or your JC or something. But you don't have to put all the way back, because I've seen some people who really put all the way in primary school and then the year really looks very long time ago, right? So then that sets like, okay, too long already. But if you are, let's say, getting your degree or your diploma at a certain year in the past, I think people can still accept that if it's the only number there. So don't put too many numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I think also we need to give recruiters more credit for what they do. They don't look at every resume and see which year, then try to penalize people. They try to look for the quality of the resume, what the person has done, what the person wants to do, what the person is good at doing, what's the value that they can bring forward in a company. So what they're looking for in a resume is coherence. Exactly, if I take a 7-second glance of your resume, right, I know what you can do very clearly.
But then, say for example, if I'm a recruiter and I know that the salary I'm going to be paying for this job is very entry level, and then I have somebody who they're already in their 40s, then I know that this person is going to try and negotiate with me, and we're going to get into a very long process about how to give more salary. Or even if this person says yes to this entry level salary, because they've had so many years working, they might not stay. So I think there is still that consideration that I guess some recruiters will have.
So when they look at a resume, they assess the value of what they're getting, and then they also have to look back at, for example, what they're willing to pay. What's the budget for their role? Yes, they will have that kind of consideration. They might also consider things like the fit. For example, your job titles. If today you have been leading teams, but this entry-level role doesn't allow you or doesn't require you to lead teams, one concern would be like, would you be able to be a team player instead of being a team leader? Would you be comfortable with that?
So like you said, they will look at your past experience rather than the year of graduation.
Yes,
because the year of graduation, by the sounds of it, doesn't really play so big a factor, because what else can it tell you except the fact that you are young or you are older?
Yes, correct. So eventually, at some point, they're going to find out your age anyway. So if today you put it in there, and if they discriminate you based on that age thing, then might as well, because you're not going to get a job anyway. Because when they're going to see you and interview, they're going to realize that, hey, you're not quite what I expected you to be.
Yeah.
And they're going to turn you around. So it's maybe better not to work for the company.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say don't worry too much about putting in the numbers of your graduation year. What you want to use your resume for, the emphasis of it is to really present the value of what you want to do and make sure it's coherent. Because most people in their resumes, they want to put in everything that they have done before. But what we want to show is the best bits of what we can do, and in a manner that is coherent. That means once we read in 5-8 seconds, we know what this person can do.
So in a nutshell, very quickly, would you recommend to put in your graduation year?
Yes.
Okay.
I would recommend put in, but don't put the primary school.
Don't put primary school. So remember, don't put your primary school. You love your primary school, you don't have to put your primary school.
Yes.
So going back to the question that we said earlier on, is ageism real? We're going to have an episode on that. We're going to talk about workplace discrimination, and that's coming up soon. But if you have a work-related question, do continue to send to us. We are at cnapodcasts@mediacorp.com.sg. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, where a video version of this is at. The team behind the Work It podcast is Crispina Robert, Joanne Chan, Junaini Johari, Saye Win, and To Yen Yun. Sound mixing is by Carrie Lim, video by Hanina Amin.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Tiffany. Have a super work week ahead.